Okay, so we're going to talk about advanced functions in this video slide, and we're going to go through, a handful of advanced functions. There's many more functions that we could talk about than what we're going to touch on this video, but really the collection of functions I'm presenting here in this video and in this course really are some of the ones you'll probably use more often than the other ones. You may use other ones, and we can have an ability to search for different functions and get some information on those, but the ones we're going to talk about in this course are really the ones I felt like you could use every day of the week working with Excel. And so again, we're in the analysis phase. Okay, we're really going to get deep into some analysis and pulling our data apart and getting information and having Excel do that legwork of analyzing data for us. We just need to understand the function to use and how to set that function up, and then Excel, does all that legwork of running that function across multiple columns and cells and rows. So we're going to use Excel's function builder tool to search for functions. We can also get a little brief description on what those functions do. And so using that tool in Excel, we're going to look at an if function, and functions, or functions. We're going to look at counts, how to count different things, count numbers, count text, count non-zero cells, count if they're equal to something, count if two cells equal something, different ways of counting our data. We're also going to look at how we can sum our data or get averages of our data based on different logical tests we're going to do. So really, if you start to notice, this if subfunction is really key to a lot of what we're going to do in Excel. Basically, an if question allows us to ask a question, and depending on the answer, we do one of two things. Okay, so if the value is greater than 5, if B3 is greater than 5, then we're going to add maybe +1. Otherwise, if that's not true, we're going to subtract 1. Okay, so this allows us to ask logical questions in Excel and have a solution, one of two different variations, depending on what the answer is to this logical test, right? This logical question. Is B3 greater than 5? If it is, if yes, add 1. If no, -1. Okay, so yes and no are also synonymous with true and false. Okay, and so this is a terminology we can now start to use. And then of course we're going to look at how we can round our numbers in Excel, rounding up, down, rounding to so many decimal places. We can also look at VLOOKUP, so a vertical lookup or a horizontal lookup, and you can think about Battleship when you think about these functions, basically looking vertically down through our data set. Once we get to a certain data value, going over and finding some data set and showing us that. That's VLOOKUP. Okay, we look down vertically and then we look across. Horizontal or HLOOKUP is just the reverse. We look across until we find some piece of data, and then we go down to pull that data out. Okay, and so two very similar functions, but allow us to let Excel search for a function, step over so many columns, and pull some data out. And we'll give an example of how we do that and what that would look like. And then we're going to look at concatenation, or concatenate, basically putting more than two things together, two or more things together. And there's two different ways of doing this. We'll kind of give you a taste of both, but this is if we want to combine multiple cells without having to manually do that. So we will jump over to our Excel at this point, and we'll look at that. So we have here an example file, ppt10, which you should have on Blackboard. We can open that up, and we'll step through some of these different functions. Now at this point, if there's ever something that is a little bit confusing, maybe we can stop the video, rewind it. I would suggest and advise to have Excel open up next to you so you can follow through as I'm going through this. You can actually follow with me and do this, and that'll help kind of lock in some of these things. And so the first function we're going to do is the if function on this tab, the if tab. I just have some data. It's some average retail prices for electricity by sector, by state for July 2014 and 2013. Okay, cents, and then all the units are cents per kilowatt hour. And so on the bottom here, we have some different all states. We have residential, commercial, industrial, transportation, and a summation of all the sectors. And so those different electric prices for 2014 July, 2013 July. Okay, so that's just our data set. And we'll scroll over here, and we have a flow chart. So remember, flow charts we can use to show the logic or the step-by-step process. And when we start talking about logical questions we're asking, like an if statement question, a flow chart is a really good way to represent that graphically. And we're going to actually move towards this, especially in our programming half of our semester. So if we ask a question like this, we asked a question that would say, if the July 14 price is greater than the July 13 price for all sectors, so this all sectors tab. Okay, so we're going to be looking at these two columns, column J and K. If 14's price is greater than 13's price, if that's true, then we want to write increase in the L column. So we want to come over to the L column for that row and say increase. So we want to know all the times when July increased from 2014 to 2013. Okay, and so we would put in here increase. We could do this manually. We could go down through and manually look and just type it in, but that's going to take a lot of time and legwork. Okay, so we can use Excel to type in a function to check that for us. Okay, and so if you recall the function builder under formulas, function builder or insert function, and we can come in here and just type in if and get a if function. Of course, a bunch of other things pop up, but we have that if function. And so we can click on it, we can get a little description of what it's going to do for us. Checks whether a condition is met, one value is greater than the other value, for example, and returns a value, one value if it's true, and another value if it's false. Okay, so it allows us to have a true, false. If it's true, do A. If it's false, do B. Okay, we hit OK. And if you notice, I've selected this column L, row 5 cell, because that's what I want to put my first function in for this first comparison for Connecticut. Okay, and so the logical test, this is the test where you say, is something greater than or less than? Is it equal to? Is it less than, right? That's where you do that logical comparison. So we can click on the column for July 2014 and say, if this cell is greater than this cell. Okay, so we just click and type in how we want to set up that logical test. So if J5 is greater than K5, whatever the value in that cell, if it's greater than the value in K5, if that's true, we want to actually have Excel type in that cell for us, increase. Okay, we click on here, so it's going to actually type the word increase. What if it's not an increase? What if it's actually equal to or less than? Well, maybe we don't care. We have the, if it's false, else write nothing. And if we want to say nothing, we don't type in nothing because we don't want to confuse ourselves with, again, more information. We might just say two quotes with nothing in between, right? And it will show nothing. Excel will put in whatever's inside quotes. Excel will show that to us verbatim. Okay, so if I put spaces, it would show spaces. If I put different symbols, it would show symbols. Whatever is inside those quotes is what we're going to see, right, from Excel. So I've set up my first one. If J5 is greater than K5, if that's true, then type or write out increase. Otherwise, basically write out nothing. And so we see that 2014 July price is greater than 2013 price, which we can see. Okay, and so we verified that for the first one. Okay, now here's where the savings really come in with Excel. We can take this function we've already generated, we can double click, and it's looking at J compared to K, right? And we can hover over that bottom right green square. When it turns into that black crosshair, we can do the flash fill, or we can click and drag down. Okay, I actually prefer the flash fill because it will fill it for all of the cells that I have data to the left of. Okay, so it does that for me. Okay, I even did it one more than I needed to, but that's okay. I could come in here and pull that back one. And so now we can see Excel has done this for us, and in most cases 2014 has increased over 2013, which you would expect, electricity prices going up. But that's how we can do a simple question. If July 14 prices are greater than 13 prices, type in or let me know that they're increasing. Okay, and so that's a simple version of the if function, and really this can be extended to lots of different scenarios. You're looking at comparing two different cell numbers or values in two different cells, and maybe it's not greater than, maybe it's you can do an equation, right? If this times 12 is greater than some number, tell me about it, let me know, right? Really, that logical comparison, if we click on that logical comparison, it will highlight that section of the function, okay? That's where we actually may ask the question. If it's true, this is what happens. If it's false, that's what happens. And so you notice that we can click on each of these sections of this function and highlight in our actual syntax what those are doing, or what we have in for those. Okay. Now, let's combine an if with an and. So let's say, I have a different scenario where we say if July 14 is greater than every July 13. Okay, so we want to look at all the sectors. Okay, if July 14 for every single sector is greater than every other single sector of July 13, we want to know about it, right? So if it's increasing across all sectors, all individual sectors, okay? So an and or, we need to remember that and being every single and has to be true. If this and this and this and this is true, then we do something. If any one of those isn't true, then we say no, they are not all true. Okay, so that's an and. An and has to have a string of logical tests that all have to be true. If they're all true, and only if they're all true, then you get a ability to say then all increasing. Okay? And of course, I think this should actually be in column N. And then if they're not all true, if 2014 sectors are not all increasing from 2013, then we're going to say nothing again. Okay, so we can go back to here, click on this first one, well, scroll up to the first one, click on that first one, again, go back to insert. We can go if, and we'll see, and really if you look at this kind of heading here, we want to type it in like this. Okay, so if first. So if, in our logical test, if you notice, our and function is nested inside our if function, because we're saying if 2014 residential is greater than 2013 residential and transportation and commercial. We need to put that and nested inside the if function where the logical test goes. So we can actually say and, okay, and what we'll do is, and you see that here, we go in and we're going to highlight this greater than this, comma. Now instead of saying and multiple times, we say and one time at the beginning, and then in between each comparison, which this is a comparison, right, we're going to put a comma because that denotes that we're going to go down to the next comparison. So this greater than this, comma, industrial greater than this, comma, transportation greater than this. Okay, so now we've in essence said this greater than this, commercial greater than this, industrial greater than this, transportation greater than this. Okay, and we built that 4 logical tests in one. Okay, with that and function, they all have to be true. If they are all true, we want to type in all increasing, or all increase. And if any one of those is false, okay, and it can be any one, but just one or more is false, we do nothing. We hit OK, and we have in here our function. and we see that it's comparing every sector 2014 to 2013. It's not including all sectors, okay? And of course, for that first scenario, one of them did not come up as 2013 less than 2014. Okay, so for, let's see, greater, 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 less. Okay, so actually 2014 was less than 2013 in the transportation section. So based on just that one not being greater for 2014, we're saying that they all did not increase. Okay, so I can again drop that down, and I have a couple much less, right, that they all increased. And so if I look at those, okay, I could come across here, and I would see that yes, in fact, for every scenario, the different sectors, 2014 was greater than 2013 for each sector of energy. Okay, and only then, when all of them and, right, we had a true final response or true final answer. Okay, so that's how an and functions. An or is very similar. We'll build that very similarly. I don't have a flow chart for it, but basically it's here. If July 14 is greater than 13, and this is for all sections, then write some increasing. Okay, and we're going to do an or. So if any of them, right, if any one or more, okay, and if we set in a sentence, if residential is increasing, or commercial is increasing, or industrial is increasing, right, we use that word or, any of them or all of them can be increasing, and we'll get a yes, one of them or more are increasing. Okay, so we build the function very similarly. And at this point, I don't need to go to the function builder. I can just start inputting if and then or. Okay, and I can say same thing, this greater than this, comma, greater than this, comma, right? So we get the point here. We're going to just look at the same type of thing there. Close that parenthesis because this is actually our logical test. Okay, all of that, and we have a comma after that. Oh man, a comma right there. Oh, close parenthesis, comma. That's what I was forgetting. And then we say if that's true, some increase. If it's false, we're not going to show anything. Okay, I got something out of order here, and I believe I know what the issue is, hopefully. Why that's there. There we go. Let's say okay. Aha, I'm missing my I5. That's where it got out of order. Okay, so now I'll go here and I'll see I'm comparing this or this, this or this, this or this, this or this, right? And if any of those are greater, we're gonna be told. So some are increasing, right? And again, same situation. Some are increasing here. Less chance of none of them increasing, right? So that's how we can put together an if with an or an and. Okay. Remember, or means any one of them can be true. And means they all have to be true. Okay. And so that's and or logic. We're going to move now over to count. So count if, count a, count fs. So we have a data set here. And all of these functions are going to be used for counting either values of numbers or whether the cell is a number or blank. Okay, and so the first function count, that counts how many numbers are in a column. And here we're looking at, this counts how many numbers are in column C. So count column C2 through C4, 40, that range. It's telling us that there's 18 numbers, right, in there. Of course, there's more than 18 rows, so you're basically saying I'm not counting the blank rows, I'm only counting a number, right? And there's 18 instances of a number. If we want to count just anything that's a non-zero or not anything that's filled in, right? So we want to say anything that's a non-blank, we do a count A. Now, so here we're looking at column E. There are 17 instances where there's some value in a cell, okay, across that range in column E. Okay, so we're just saying, you count all the Y's, it's our 17 Y's. Column B, okay, we're looking at how many numbers in column B are greater than 4, okay? So this is where we're adding an if. So the way this could be in, English words would be if the number in column B is greater than 4, count it, right? So how many numbers are greater than 4 in column B? And it's telling us that there's 25 numbers. So if I come in here and I change this 2 to a 5, we'll see we have an increase, right? Now there's 26. Okay, change that back to 2, it's 25. Okay, so now a variation of this, count if S, all you're doing now with the S is to say multiple. So you have multiple comparisons. So you can say if column B is greater than 4 and column A, say, is less than 8. Okay, so you can have a combination logic. Okay, and we can say if the first criteria range, okay, so that's the range of where we're looking, if the data in that range and the criteria is greater than 4, and you see how we have parentheses inside around this to say or quotes rather, to say inside quotes greater than 4. Now, I'm not sure why Excel requires us to put quotes in there, because a lot of times when we see quotes, we're actually going to read that physical text, right? But in this scenario, we're not using it that way. We're using it actually to tell Excel this is the logical comparison. Okay, so if, and that's our criteria, so if column B is greater than 4 and column A is greater than or less than 8, we're going to count those scenarios. Okay, so there are 16 points at which both column B is greater than 4 and column A is less than 8 across our data. Okay, so now we're at this combinational logic. Similarly, we can sum. If a value is greater than 6 in column B, we sum them. So all the values greater than 6, we add them together. Same type of variation. If B, so our sum range, B is in our criteria range, B, right, is greater than 7, and A is equal to 5, okay? So for any situations where B is greater than 7 and A is equal to 5, we're going to add up those values in column B. Because our sum range, we're only going to take out the data from column B, okay? But before we take it out, we're going to say if that value is greater than 7 and the value in that row of A, column A, is equal to 5, okay? So basically, greater than 7 and equal to 5. So come here, we have a greater than 7 in B equal to 5. That would get pulled. This one, where this value is not greater than 7, but that is equal to 5, that value would not get pulled and added. Okay, so it's saying we have to look at both columns, and if that logical comparison applies and is true for both, then we pull the appropriate value from it, B, and add it to itself. Moving down to averages, same with averages, and these work the same as the sums. We're not going to really spend a lot of time, but you can see that we can average numbers from a range of data only if they pass a certain logical test. And of course, we can do the combination too as well. So the S really has the combination effect, but the if allows us to ask questions about the data before we calculate sums or how many or averages. Okay, moving to rounding. Rounding should be pretty straightforward. We can come in here and we can say round, and the first function is just a straight round, rounding number to a specific number of digits, okay? So, and that's decimal places. So I can say round this number here to 3 decimal places, okay? Because I don't need all that precision. I'm just going to round it to 3. Okay, so that could be a scenario where we want to round all our numbers to 3. We can round up, so equals round up. And the number, and how many digits, and again we can say 3. So this rounds up, right? Or we can round down. Same thing, we can round down to 3 digits. And so as you can see, the base round function defaults to rounding up, whereas up and down will round up and down accordingly. And again, I can select all these, I can drag these down, okay, and I can get those to all happen for all of those, okay. In a scenario like this where you say round to 3 but it only shows 2, what is happening there is it's a trailing 0. So Excel defaults and trailing 0 is just to say they're not significant, right? So don't show them, okay? So that's rounding. We look at VLOOKUP. Remember, VLOOKUP looks vertically down a column, okay? So we start looking down a column, and once we find something, we say, okay, now look over so many columns and tell me what that value is in that cell, okay? So when would we use this? We may use this when we have, say, a really large data set, and we want to find information from a table by maybe looking for part numbers and then pulling out descriptions and prices and vendors and that information, okay? And so here's kind of how I'm setting this up. We have the part number we're looking for, and we're going to look for a manufacturer, we're going to look for the description, the price, and who we're getting that part from, okay? Now, before we do this, the one thing we need to remember is whenever we use VLOOKUP, whatever we're looking for has to be the very first column from left to right in our table, okay? So if we want to look for a part number, we will only be able to find information to the right of that part number, okay? So we come down here and we say, look for the part number 70-7082 D141. Once you find it, go over and find the price, okay? So pull out that price, and that'll work fine. What if we want to find this manufacturer, right? We come down here, we find that part number. We cannot go to the left, okay? VLOOKUP does not go to the left. It only goes to the right, so down and to the right. So if we are to use this effectively, a lot of times we'll put whatever type of data we're looking for on the very left of our table. So to solve this, I can select the part number column, right click, I can cut that, and I can come over here, click, and then right click and insert. Okay, so I've now moved it all the way to the left. Okay, so now when I come down, click here, then I can jump over and find MagnaCraft. Okay, so let's start building this. And so I'll use this and do VLOOKUP, and there we go. And of course the HLOOKUP. But this looks for a value in the leftmost column of a table and then returns a value in the same row. Okay, so that's important, same row from a column you specify. So by default, the table must be sorted in ascending order. Okay, so we need our part numbers in ascending order. Okay, so we can sort them ascending, and then once we have that, which I've done that already, we can then start to use it. So what do we want to look up? Okay, so VLOOKUP value is the value to be found in the first column of the table. Okay, and so we want to actually look for that part number, so we can click on that cell. So whatever is in I2, that's what we want to look for. The table array is a table of text, numbers, or logical values in which the data is to be retrieved. Okay, and so what's the table? So I can select the table. Now usually I just select all the columns in the table, right? And I don't have to worry about rows because it's going to look in every row. Okay, just an easier way. Now this column index, what is that? This is the column number in the table array from which the matching value should be returned. Okay, so what does that mean? We are looking for manufacturer, okay? And we're going to come down to our part number, and then we're going to want to jump over 1, 2, 3 columns over to column C and pull out and get Excel to show us what's in that cell in column C. Okay, and Excel uses numbers, right? Computers run off a number, so we can't just put C, okay, because it doesn't interpret C as column C. We actually need to do 3, because in reality it's 1, 2, 3 from part number column. Okay, so we have the third column over, which is our manufacturer, and then we say the lookup range. Now this can be a true or false, and true, it's not quite. When you have if you put true in there, you will find values that are almost the same, whereas false gives you exact matches. So you want to find the exact match, okay? So you're looking for the exact part number, so we'll type in false to find the exact part number. Hit OK, and of course it's spit out MagnaCraft. So it's looked down in our part numbers, it's found the first instance of that part number, looked over 3, and found MagnaCraft. It will stop though, so I've copied multiple of the same to show you that it will stop at the first instance it finds, go over, and be done, okay? And it will have completed its task. So to copy this down for description, for price, for supplier, I can copy that down. Now I need to edit this, okay? So I need to double click it and say, oh, I don't want to look for MagnaCraft. I want to move that back up to here. Okay, I could also put in here the $sign to lock that to I2. I still want to look through table array A to G. My column index, though, I want description is actually 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to change that to 4. Okay, so my description is a relay base. Same thing, I can now copy this down. I've locked that to H or I2, but I need to change my column index to price, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? 5 across. So there's my price. Of course, let me actually format that as a price, right? So I can tell that from just looking at it, it's my price. And I'll slide down here into supplier. And I believe that's the 7th column, and so allied, okay? And so if I change this now to some other part number, let's say I change it to this part number. I can now put in here any type of part number, and it will update, right, that information it looks, because it's now looking for that part number, pulling out the manufacturer description, price, and supplier. So that's VLOOKUP. Of course, HLOOKUP will do a very similar process, except instead of looking vertically and then horizontally, it'll look horizontally and then vertically. Okay, so just a different instance. And again, what you're looking for has to be in the first row, just like for VLOOKUP, it has to be in the first column to the left. We'll touch on concatenate very quickly here. So concatenate, say you have a list of cells that you want to actually combine all these, well, maybe these part numbers and model numbers and manufacturer into one order number. Okay, so you can take this, add it to this, and add it to this. So instead of having to retype all those together, you can simply come in here and use the concatenate function, which if you click on any function, you will get a description of what it does, and then an example code and syntax for what it will do and how it, the different parts, okay, and some common problems, all right. And so that can be helpful if you're trying to, research a new function and how it works and you're not quite sure. You can just click on it when it highlights to blue, and it can take you to a link to actually explain it. But the text here, we're combining this cell with this text in between, so it's a little space, and then that cell text, and then a little space, and then that cell, and then a dash, that cell, and then of course there's more here that doesn't show all the way. Oh, that's the last one. Yeah. you can add an indefinite amount. And so it's combined all of those into one value. Similarly, we could just do this ampersand symbol. So we could even streamline this and say B4 and that's the space, and C2 and another space, and D4 and then the dash, and then H4. It can be a little tedious because you physically have to put an and sign. If you want any types of symbols, you need to actually have those symbols in quotes to add those to that text string. But that's how you can combine or concatenate. So this has been kind of a lot of information. You may want to go back through this and review and use the example file to kind of step through these yourself. Just remember, you can go to any function and you can kind of click on the different sections to see the different subsections of that function and what parts you've actually identified. So this is the syntax, how we write that in. And notice that there's a comma between each of these sections to denote the different parts of the function. You can also click on the function and it will pull up a window that will show you an example code, right? And some even have videos, okay, of how that function works, okay, and examples of how to do that and what the different parts of that function are. So hopefully this has been helpful. We'll get into this more in class, and I'll see you then.